welcome to another video. Today I'm going to talk about Homicide Life on the Streets, the 90s show from Barry Levinson as an executive producer, all set in the Homicide Department from Baltimore, which is Levinson's hometown, based on a book by David Simon, who would go on to do The Wire, and this was kind of his starting point into television. Homicide was the kind of thing this is where he learned this craft, because he started off just writing a book, sold it to them, they started making a TV show, and then eventually they started coming in and pitch stories for them, and end up becoming a writer and a producer and learn how to do the craft of producing through this TV show. Now, it's not like the kind of TV shows you would make for like HBO, like The Wire or Generation Kill or something, which are much more focused, much less about episodic stories and much more about the environments people are in and how the environment shape them. This is much more, I would say, much more of an existential thing, really, which is weird for a TV show that's comes from someone at NBC, but that's kind of what it was. It was an existential TV cop show, which always did badly in the ratings because it was not like something like NYPD Blue, which was a big hit at the time, where it was much more of a soap opera, because you had characters who were much more sympathetic and much more noble, even though they were flawed. In Homicide, no one was that noble. People were really flawed, but they had, the police work had a noble intent, but they had to find a way to that through their problems. When Simon moved on to The Wire and The Corner and Generation Kill, he was much more about people who were defined by their environments and how they fought against their environments and how they were destroyed by their environments, and it was much more about how the environments crushed you, and it was much less sentimental, really, than any cop show or any crime show could ever be on a major network. Homicide was as close as you could possibly get. And Homicide was the thing that kind of led to The Wire, because you also had Oz, which came out as the Homicide went on. Because Tom Fontana, who was the executive producer of Homicide, who was the guy who ran it basically, also created Oz, because he had the thought of what happened to all the people they put in jail. So from that he created Oz and brought in a lot of actors who were in Homicide to be in this show, and they started to show you what happened to the criminals, which the success of that led to them financing Sorpranos, which led to The Wire, and HBO with Deadwood and stuff. So it was like Homicide was kind of the key focus, really, for HBO to move forward. It was a kind of show that kind of brought a lot of the talent together, which then would show, we can do good stuff, and it would bring in other talent, like David Chase, and bringing David Simon from Homicide, and bringing Tom Fontana for Oz, and David Milch, who was in NYPD Blue, to bring him in to do Deadwood, which was his magnum opus. Deadwood's amazing. Deadwood's one of my favourite TV shows. I'd rate Deadwood over The Wire, which is funny because in this case, with the Homicide versus NYPD Blue, I'd definitely rate Homicide far above NYPD Blue. But it just shows you how talents evolve, because Homicide's the best you're ever going to get for drama on a mainstream American channel, especially with the older model, because Homicide struggled forever to stay relevant, because it was always had low ratings. It was always on the verge of being cancelled. Like every year, they didn't have a clue whether they're coming back for another year. As the show went on, they had to try and find like big episode ideas, like two-parters that would actually bring viewers in for a while, just to keep themselves going. They'd have to add younger detectives to it as the show went on to try and get some interest going. But the show never really lost its sense of depression. That was a big problem with the show for most people. It was a depressing show. It was only like the final season where it started to get too slick for its own good. So this final season was probably the weakest season. It's like you can actually, from season 1 to 6, it feels of a 1, even though it changed as it went. Season 7 takes a while to get back to that, but there's some really good episodes in season 7 as well. And then it all wraps up with the Homicide the movie. But it was like, it's definitely the weakest season of the whole bunch, because by the point, in that point, all the really good characters had gone. So I'll start off, really, because I've been yapping around it. So, Homicide had it literally is about cops who are in a Baltimore Police Department, which is underfunded, and nobody cares that much in the department as long as you make your numbers. And that's the big thing that passed through to The Wire as well, is making those numbers, making sure you can see the department solved this many crimes and passed these many crimes over to the prosecution department so they can prosecute. Doesn't matter whether they've won or not in the prosecution, as long as you get these numbers. So there's a board that's always always in view of everybody, where you get the red and you get the black. The black means you've solved the case, you've passed it to the prosecutors, and they're going to indict people and push it through the system, the court system. The red means you haven't solved it, you haven't actually put the case through to the prosecutors yet, which means you have to actually work the case. And if your cases are all red, you look like a really bad detective. If your cases are all black, you look really good, because it means you can solve cases and you can put down cases. So if you're bleeding red, because if you're the one with all the red and bringing department numbers down, you're the one who's dragging the department down, making the department look bad. So that's always an issue through the show, and if you get a red ball basically means a case where it's unsolved, there's multiple murders, a serial killer or like a sniper or something, and it's all red. It's just like, hey, you're depressed, which is something they bring out a lot. Is one of the big things is, is your tally all red, or is it all black, or is it in the middle? You know, it's always something that everyone's concerned about, because it's the thing that defines them. So if a sergeant sees as all detectives are all red, he looks bad, or she looks bad. If a captain sees because there's a captain overseeing one shift, if most of the detectives are all red, they have to come down and definitely say, well, what are you doing? Why are you not solving this stuff? And you've also different shifts that come in. So you've got the A shift and the B shift, so sometimes you work days, sometimes you work nights, and your days off in between, and the workout rotation. So that's all the stuff that comes into effect in this show, like the politics, because the numbers always go up to the captains, then the colonels, and then the people in charge of the police department, and they're always looking at it because that affects their job as well. And because homicide's a creme de la creme, you want to get to homicide, but you want to succeed in homicide. If you don't succeed in homicide, you're not viewed as a great cop. So you have to succeed. If you're women homicide, that's where you make your name. But it's all about the people in homicide and how actually good grinding the job can really wear you down, because all you're seeing is the worst part of humanity. All you're doing is going to murder cases, going to talk to witnesses, finding a lot of them lying to you, then try to piece together what actually happened. That's really your job, is like, who's lying to me, who's going to be, who can you trust, who can you not trust, how are they lying? Are they lying because they're the killer, or they're lying to protect somebody? You have to also try and take apart all of that logic and try and work out what's actually going on. And that's what's wonderful with the series, because it's all about the process of doing this. It's not about actually succeeding, because I mean, one of the biggest cases they actually have in the show is the Dana Watson case. It starts early on in the first season, it's the first story, and it goes all the way through the show, and it never gets solved. You know, the other big case is the Luther Mahoney case, which is a drug dealer in the different areas of Baltimore. He's the one who's controlling the drug trade, and he's hard to find because he's causing a lot of murders. And the way out of that is so disastrous to the department that it's even worse than the Dana Watson case for like just traumatizing everybody. It's like, so the big takeaway from this show is good deeds doesn't matter, because they're probably going to fail anyway. That's one of the reasons why the show didn't do well rating wise. It was like, there was lots of stuff torn about how these people are doing this job and nobody cares. Literally, if you see anybody in the police talking about the police department, people just turn off the TV, they don't want to know. They don't want to know what the police are doing. Just protect them, they're really selfish, they do not care. You know. And the show would also run into lots of people who are just doing their jobs, and so as they go through different investigations, you're seeing a lot of people in working class environments, people in rich environments, poor environments, different types of environments. As you talk to them, you find out their lives. So half the show's about the lives of Baltimore people, the lives of the criminals, the lives of the people who are affected by the crime, and you're seeing it all through the lives of detectives who are getting affected by it, and they get affected by the idea that things don't work out. And you also get the whole idea of police brutality and how the police can be corrupt as well. They can be corrupt institutionally, like just about the red and the blacks. They can be corrupt how they deal with their own people. Like, if someone doesn't like you up top, they will make your life a living hell. That's obvious. People who are incompetent get promoted above people who are competent, just to keep the competent people down to do their job, but not get any delusions of grandeur. You know, there's all sorts of things going on with that. It's just it's always a world where people fail upwards, which is what you see in real life, and that's another reason why it was never successful, because people are seeing this in real life and then come back to see it in TV and see, yeah, I know, can you give me the fantasy of things that work out a little bit? Not in this show. This show, it never happens. If you're a policeman in this show, your life will be ruined at some point in the show. Like, very few characters in this show get alive or get out sane, and the ones that do, it's just because of just starting the job, and you haven't. If they got another few seasons of the show, they would have been destroyed as well. You know, even the optimistic ones get destroyed, and those are the ones that really survive. The ones who knew from the start the whole thing was doomed, so just do your job. Because there's all this thing about burnout, about how do you keep going, how do you keep working through this environment. And that's kind of the theme of the show. It's like, how do you survive in a corrupt, horrible world? So there's lots of really good characters. I mean, it's led by Yaphet Kotto as G, who's the captain, really, or the lieutenant. He reports to his captain, but he's a lieutenant of his shift. And so he's the one that oversees everything. He's the one that they come into with the case files, and they talk through everything, try and work out what's going on. But he gives them a lot of leeway because he trusts his people. So he only ever really comes in when they need him, and when they need a kick up the backside. So he's kind of the person that comes in when they need another point of view, who says, you're missing this, or you're missing that. But he lets them follow their leads a lot. And he's a mysterious character. You don't find out that much about his past until the season's well on and you're starting to get more details. Like, you find out he's half Italian, half black. He's got a lot of mysterious past. He does have interest in civil rights, and you can see how a policeman can get in the way of that. So it's a complicated character who takes time to get to know him. He's got a past, he's got a family who he has difficulties with. So you never fully get to know him. But that's kind of appropriate for who he is. It's like someone they trust but they don't know that well. And he likes to keep a distance from them because he sees them go through. They go through the department. There's always going to be new cops going through, so he's never going to get that close to people unless they've been around for a very long time. And even then, they're still going to be distant because he's still the boss. Then you've got the star detective, which is Frank Pemberton, played by Andre Braugher. Now, one thing you'll notice with the show when you watch it is this is like the most multicultural show you'll see. It's like most of the really good partnerships are between like different cultures. Like you get like most of the really good interactions usually exist between two different races as they yap their way through a situation and just chat and have their differences because they come from different backgrounds. So Pemberton is the star detective. He's got a religious upbringing. Even though he's starting to question his faith, he still has the religious force of this is right and this is wrong, and we speak for the dead, we speak for people who are killed. Like, he has a moral purpose that some of the other detectives don't have. He has a passion that's driving him insane because he doesn't feel that other people have share the passion. Even though he's a very good detective, he's very observant, and the passion only comes up every so often, but usually it's there for theatrical reasons. But he's a guy working a job at the same time. But he's a really complicated character who it takes a lot of time to unwind all his problems and his difficulties. He's kind of repressed, and he has a complicated relationship with his wife, who he loves, but he's so into his ideals that he's annoying to be around sometimes. She just has to basically tell him to, calm down. So he's a really complicated, interesting character. He's partnered by Tim Bayliss, and played by Kelsey Core, who's a new recruit. He's the guy who was in the Mayor's Detail. He was a political assignment to Homicide. No one thinks he should be there. No one wants him there at the start of the show. He has to prove himself to be competent. It takes a long time because he learned under Pemberton how to work a case and how to really deliver. And they fight all the time because you've got the cynical Pemberton who sees all the worst in people, even though he's idealistic. But he's a very good detective because he sees people for who they are. He wants to be better, but he can see what they are. And Bayliss, who has to get that idealism chipped away from him. And that's one of the really good partnerships throughout the show, is these two facing off each other. And eventually they split apart but then come back together, and by the time that happens, Bayliss is much more seasoned himself. And Bayliss is a character who is deeply affected by his own past, which involved abuse. And he's trying to work through that. And it's also... he's just got a lot of issues with people as well, but in different types of way. But none of these characters are black and white. They've all got their complexities. They've all got difficulties. They're people who could start an argument in an empty room. Well, quite a lot of them could. The Pemberton definitely could. Then you've got Meldrick Lewis, played by Clark Johnson, who's the character that goes through the entire show. He's an actor who became a director throughout the show as well, and learned his craft through that and went on to direct other stuff. And he's like the everyman. He's a character who's very flawed. Another black character is very flawed. He's very much bumbling through his life, but he's very good at what he does. He doesn't see this as a calling the way Pemberton does. He sees it as a job. He clears enough cases every year to keep his job, but he's not like the Crusader. Like, he's the kind of guy who will just keep going. He just keeps plodding away. And it's really interesting because you have to see, as the series goes on, how he's an emotional distance from everybody. And how that actually causes lots of problems because he doesn't deal with his own emotional problems. So even though in some ways he seems the sanest, in other ways he's actually kind of the most insane, because he really can let people down in really hurtful ways and not own up to it, which is a problem for some of his partners. Is like he's and he kind of he gets a feeling that a lot of his partners, he seems to be the doomed detective where all his partners have sad endings, and he starts to feel cursed, which is really funny but kind of sad at the same time. But he's also a person who's emotionally distant from people, so it's complicated. You've got Melissa Leo as Kay, and she's the lone woman in the police department and the homicide department. She's one of the best detectives. She's stuck for the first season or two with the slob played by Daniel Baldwin, who she has to deal with, even though he's very annoying to her. So she's the idealist, and he's the basically I'll do enough to get by kind of thing. So that's an interesting partnership. You've also got, early on, you've John Polito as the conspiracy theory detective who, because of behind the scenes things, his character ended up committing suicide fairly early on, which created a mystery throughout the story of where he'd been and what happened to him and why was he suicidal when no one knew. Not even Meldrick, who was his partner. So with stuff like that, when you had Beatty as Bolander, who's the older cop, who's very grumpy, and he's stuck with Munch. Munch is the conspiracy theory, another conspiracy theory guy who's Jewish, very Jewish, and very pessimistic. You know, and this character Munch has gone through a bunch of other TV shows as well, so it's a constant. So that was the basic setup for the first set of characters, and the series didn't do too well because they're all depressives. And as the seasons went on, they tried to bring in other characters who were more fun. But pretty much as soon as they came on, they became depressive too. So you couldn't really do much. I mean, the photograph I've got, wrong one, that way, yep, is from the mid-season. So some of the people I've talked about have gone by that point already. But yeah, I mean, I started at season 4 and then I went back, watched the earlier episodes as I went forward. So I started off when Kellerman came in, played by Reed Diamond. He was basically the best replacement character they ever had. He was one of the first characters to come in as a replacement because a few of the other actors left. I think I saw actually part of season 3 as well, but it kind of all I have a feeling that season 3 and season 4 were all pretty close together when they were shown on Channel 4 and over here, and it was hard to find. But when Kelvin came on, that was when I started becoming a real big fan of Homicide, and you started to be a fan repeats on Channel 4 at 4 in the morning or something. So he was the best replacement character because he came in. He was as neurotic as any character from the original cast, because he was viewed as a good-looking guy. He came from the fire department, but pretty much you found out pretty soon he was needy, neurotic. He had a very simplistic view of life, good guys and bad guys. He had a temper, and and like Meldrick, who we became partners with, he wasn't always good at dealing with his own problems, and he could behave in the worst possible way to deal with a problem. And this was another great dynamic of the show, was Meldrick and Kellerman, because they were a really fun team, because they were screwed up in a very different way from Bayliss and Pembleton, but pretty much as screwed up, but just in a different way. So those two teams who could clash with each other as well, but also would interact a lot in interesting ways, and you'd start to see weird dynamics and weird darknesses coming through both of them, and which would lead to the Luther Mahoney thing. When Luther Mahoney started to come in as a drug dealer they couldn't get, and it would drive Meldrick and Kellerman nuts. And then Kellerman had his investigation because he's accused of corruption, and slowly he'd watch this character unwind at the same time and just lose it, basically. At the same time, Pembleton would have a stroke, and he would have to pull himself back together as well. So you'd see season 5 how it was like the point where a lot of the characters were really tested. They were getting the crap beaten out of them. They were dealing with a drug war, and it's when the show went from being much more realistic to being a bit more melodramatic, but in a really interesting way, because it was really testing characters and really punching them in the gut. Now, that's the thing. That's the big difference in The Wire. The Wire was more realistic, but never the feeling that it really went into the characters as much as Homicide did. Homicide really twisted characters and showed you how screwed up they were and showed you how messed up. And so you felt there was a lot more depth to the characters in Homicide than The Wire, at least the cop characters. That was the kind of difference. And there was a kind of existential thing of why are you doing this when it doesn't mean anything. And that was the thing that was always under the surface of all these characters. A lot of them could delude themselves and think they're doing something, but they really weren't. There was always another case. As soon as you solved one, there was always another case. And this led to the Luther Mahoney shooting, where basically that was one of the few types of TV shows that I was absolutely like, ugh. Because you don't have when your lead character shoots someone in cold blood, which happened in this incident. This was like basically, they find a lead to Mahoney, they set up a sting, This thing goes down, Mahoney's in trouble, Mahoney's running. Mildred catches up with him, beats him up. So basically, it's a police beating. Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. It's a police brutality, but it's black on black, which makes it much more dubious for we want to be moral about it in the way that we are nowadays. And then Kellerman comes in after Mahoney gets the gun, and the gun's kind of shaking as it going down. It's down a bit, but he's still got the possibility to go like that, so he's never quite sure. Then Kellerman shoots him, and it was like, oh my god, you never expect that to come. And that set up the drug wars of season 6, where all hell broke loose. Kellerman became paranoid, friendships were ruined, and basically to a 2-part episode directed by Catherine Bigelow, where basically after simmering all year, we get a drug war where basically the drug kingpin come after the cops and starts shooting up the police station, and they go to war with them, and everybody dies, and ends up coming out what happened in the police station, what happened in the shooting, which means Kellerman has to resign, and Pemberton, who figured it out, is so destroyed, he has to go as well. So it's like, yeah, it's not realistic in the same way as it was before, but it's great drama, and it's existential drama. What makes you a person? What makes you a person alive? What makes you a person in this environment? And can you stand it any longer? And can you keep moving on when you've just got horrors upon horrors? And these characters find they can't. That would have been a perfect ending to the show. And in some ways it is the ending to the show, because season 7 took ages to get over here, so it took me a while to see season 7. And season 7 had a really weak start, and it wasn't as good, it had to replace a lot of characters. And those characters came in, took a while to settle. And it felt like the stuff they were finishing off in season 7 and Homicide the movie was just like the epilogue. It didn't really feel like it was the main meat of the drama. And that was kind of the problem, I think. It was like, the show had peaked, and peaked a few times, but it had a conclusion. It was like, that was a satisfying conclusion. You don't need any more. There were some good episodes in season 7 where there's one called Kellerman PI, when Kellerman comes back as a PI, and it's what happens there. But a lot of the characters after that weren't as good as what was there before, and that was kind of the problem. So the season 7 is okay, but it's not peak Homicide in any way. Homicide the movie is a lot better. It still has its problems, but it's a lot better than it was, and you get to see finales for a lot of characters. But Homicide's great. Homicide's one of the great miracles of the 90s, along with The Simpsons. It's just one of those great shows. Even with its flaws, its peaks are so good. There's so many really cool episodes. There's the one where a guy gets trapped in a subway and he's cut in half and he's going to die, and they have to talk him down to his death. There's one with Lily Tomlin where she's been taken back for the murder of somebody, and she explained why she did it and stuff like that. There's tons of episodes like that with one-offs. There's one where Munch finds a dead body that turns out to be a girl he fancied when he was at school. There's lots of these little episodes that really deliver and really give you a lot of interesting things. You've got a lot of stuff about Nazis, white supremacists, all sorts of racial issues. Like, you've got one where you've got a cop played by Bruce Campbell who, his father was killed, and then suddenly the person who killed him turns up dead, and they know he did it, and it's like, how do you prove it? And it's about the corruption within the police department, which Kellerman actually is the one who investigates. And then that turns into season 2 later when he's the one getting investigated, so it shows you how the mechanism keeps going of how people can get shunned through crime and through dealing with crime. So I've been on for half an hour with Homicide. I could go on for an hour quite easily, but I'll stop here. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this encourages you to go and watch the show. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful. So bye for now. I'll be back soon.